Today is March 18th, 2015. My name is Joe Todd. This is an interview with John Gaines in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Sir, where were you born?
I was born in Hominy, Oklahoma, a hospital in Hominy, and after we had been married a few years, my wife and I found out that we were both born in the same hospital, delivered by the same doctor. And we didn't even know that before we were married.
When's your birthday?
June 11, 1947.
Who's your father?
My father was Jack Gaines.
And your mother?
Lenora Gaines.
What was her maiden name?
Her maiden name was Clark.
Clark. Did you go through school in Hominy?
No, I went to school at Pawhuska.
Pawhuska?
Yeah.
Graduated what year?
1965.
1965.
We are planning our 50th reunion. Can't believe it's that many years, but
I had mine last year.
yeah.
I was 64. In your schooling, who was your favorite teacher?
Oh, I don't know if I have a real favorite. I can remember Mr. Whitworth, who was our choir leader, our choral music director. He probably had a lot of influence on me. There are other teachers that we had. I was very fortunate. We had some very good teachers when I went through school. May not be that way today, but certainly then we had some good ones.
Okay. What type of work did your father do?
He was he managed a ranch. Worked on a ranch all his life. Well, I shouldn't say all his life, because later he left the ranch and was pumping some oil wells.
Okay.
But the biggest part of his life, he worked on a ranch.
Okay. Now, did you live on the ranch?
Yeah, I grew up on a ranch southwest of Pawhuska.
Which ranch?
That was the old Fred Craddock Ranch.
Okay. What chores did you do around the house and on the ranch?
Not so much around the house, I guess, but around the ranch. I mean, my brother and I both raised 4-H steers, so we had those to take care of. We would feed them and water them and do that sort of thing. But we also did things like maybe collect eggs out of the barn. We fed the horses. We took care of any cattle that was there, there on the ranch. We helped our dad on the ranch, doing all sorts of things.
What was your favorite chore on the ranch?
Favorite chore? I don't know. I maybe taking care of the horses, feeding the horses, taking care of them.
What's your least favorite chore?
Least favorite. I remember once I had to go clean out an old chicken house. I didn't like that job. That was probably one of my least favorite things that I can remember.
Describe the house you lived in.
We had a house that where I grew up most of my life. It's kind of hard to describe. It was probably a compilation of two houses, actually. Part of it was stone. It had a rock veneer, at least. The other part was more of a wooden structure. They had combined the two, I think, in kind of a rambling house, but good place to grow up.
Okay, good. Where were you when President Kennedy was assassinated?
Let's see, I was in high school, and I remember bringing all of us into the auditorium and sitting down in front of a TV and watching what was going on, watching the news as it happened.
What do you think about that? The president's been shot.
Well, obviously it was a shock to everybody then, something you wouldn't expect. I probably, like everybody else, was surprised and really wondered what was going on.
Were you in the Boy Scouts?
No.
Because, Pawhuska has the first Boy Scout
Yeah,
troop.
they did. I was in the Cub Scouts for a while at
Yeah.
Pawhuska, but I was not in the Boy Scouts.
Yes. Does Pawhuska plan anything for that, first Boy Scout troop?
I don't know. I was in Pawhuska here a week or so ago, and I was driving through town, and they used to have this statue, this monument, in a certain part of town, and I noticed it wasn't there, and I thought, I wonder what happened to that. Well, then I noticed that they have Pawhuska now has a museum thing, and it was sitting in front of it, so it's still there.
Yeah. That's the old train depot.
Yep, the old train depot.
Yes. What'd you do for recreation in high school?
Oh, well, growing up on a ranch, I did a lot of fishing and hunting and things like that, outdoors. Later on, as I got a little older, I was doing quite a bit of, going to quite a few rodeos and things like that. I used to team rope steers. And
The cavalcade?
no, never was at the cavalcade, but
We used to go to the cavalcade every year.
yeah. But I had plenty to do.
Yeah.
Of course, in high school, I played football, so I was involved in that, and not only during the season, but getting ready for the season and things like that. So.
Yeah, my sister was in the rodeo club here, the Radnor Club,
Yep.
and we'd go to the cavalcade every year.
Yeah.
Had fond memories of that.
I remember as growing up, we'd go out to the local rodeo there in Pawhuska. The Roundup Club would have rodeo once a week usually. I think it was on Friday or Saturday. I can't remember now, but anyway, we used to go to that quite often and spend quite a bit of time there.
Did Ben Johnson ever come there? Ever see him?
I've seen Ben Johnson several times, and I'll tell you why. Like I said, growing up on that ranch, the owner of the ranch was the chairman of the Ben Johnson Memorial Steer Roping for a few years. And one of the activities at that steer roping on Saturdays, they would run the steers through the chutes just to make sure that they'd run good on Sunday during the roping. Well, Ben Johnson typically was at that roping every year. And I remember one year, the last year I guess it was the year after he had competed in the rodeo, in the roping, we were running the steers through the chutes on that Saturday morning just to get them ready for Sunday. And after we had run all the steers through, we needed to bring them back up to the chutes, and so everybody went down and gathered the steers up and was bringing them back. Well, there's one that broke out of the group, and Ben Johnson decided he would cut it off and bring it back. Well, his horse slipped and fell with him, and he ended up breaking a couple of ribs, and I don't know if there was something else, but he had several injuries. The last year, his movie contract would allow him to compete in that steer roping. But I've also seen, he was also out at the ranch a time or two looking at some horses.
Yeah. Now that rodeo was named after his father, isn't it?
After his father, yes.
Yes. I don't think it'd be at your own memorial rodeo.
No. But he used to compete every year in that.
Yeah. What'd you do after high school?
Well, after high school, I went to Oklahoma State for 2 years. Was not a good student. Ended up getting drafted in '67, and I knew if I was drafted, I knew exactly what I was going to be doing. That I was going to be in Vietnam, probably with a pack on my back and carrying a rifle through the jungles. And I just knew for myself that did not paint a good picture. I knew that my chances of returning home alive or without some serious injuries was very slim. I mean, I just knew that. And at that point, I had what I felt was three options. One was to go ahead and follow the course of action that I knew I would be involved with, second course, I had heard about people who had gone off to Canada to avoid the draft, but I knew for myself that wasn't an option because I just knew I had a duty to serve my country. But the third option was one where I had a little bit of time before I had to check into the induction center. So I knew that if I enlisted, I'd be able to choose the type of schooling that I wanted. And I thought that made more sense than just being drafted and marching through the jungle carrying a rifle. So I went to a recruiting station and I enlisted.
In Pawhuska?
I don't remember where it was, to tell you the truth. It's been too long ago, but I went and enlisted, and I chose a school that I thought would be something that I'd be interested in, and maybe have some value to me later on. I wanted to be an aircraft repair parts specialist. In other words, handling repair parts for aircraft that were damaged or shot down or whatever. So in September of '67, I was inducted into I reported to the induction station in Oklahoma City, went to Fort Polk, Louisiana. After basic training, went to Fort Lee, Virginia, to the Army's quartermaster's school, where they taught me how to handle repair parts for aircraft. From there, they sent me to Atlanta Army Depot for a couple of months, just for some additional training, and then from there I went to Vietnam.
Let me back up.
Okay.
Do you remember the Gulf of Tonkin incident?
I don't remember it other than hearing about it and reading about it and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about Vietnam, in high school, all this?
It sounded like a scary place, and I just didn't think about it that much. At that age, and with everything going on around you, you just didn't give it that much of attention.
Mm-hmm. Did Vietnam, were you in ROTC at OSU?
I was in ROTC, yes.
Yes. Army or Air Force?
Army.
Army, okay. So you went to Fort Polk for basic?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about basic.
Well, basic training was, I found it very interesting. I determined that I was going to have a positive attitude about whatever was happening. You can go into something like that with a negative attitude, saying, "Oh, woe is me," and kind of fight the whole thing the whole time, or you can go into it with a positive attitude and try to do your very best and get something positive out of it. And I went in with that kind of attitude, and I think that really helped. Basic training was tough. I mean, it's intended to be tough. It's intended to get you in shape. It's intended to instill in you some discipline as far as following orders and learning how to do things the Army way. But it was a positive experience, actually. I learned my limitations. I couldn't run as far and as fast as some people could. So I knew that was not something that I was exceptionally good at. But at other things, I learned that I could do very well at.
Mm-hmm.
So all in all, it was a good experience. I've never been in as good a shape as I was then. But of course, that's the intent of basic training, is to.
What weapon did you train with? Was it the M16 or M14?
No, it was the M14.
Okay. What'd you fire? What'd you qualify?
I don't know. I've got a medal up here somewhere. What does that say?
Oh, that's expert.
Yeah.
Yeah, you fired expert. Well, being on a ranch, hunting.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that was nothing new to me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What's your most vivid memory of basic?
Of basic? That's a good question. I can remember one thing about basic. I don't know if it's most vivid or not, but I remember we were trained to shoot at night. They gave us some BB guns, and they took us out and waited until it got dark, or at least fairly dark, and then they would toss an item in the air for us to shoot at. And I found it very interesting how well you could hit that thing even in the dark.
What was it they threw up?
It was just a target. It wasn't a tin can, but it wasn't much bigger than a tin can. It was fairly small. But as I recall, it was kind of a disc. But they throw it up, and believe it or not, after a while, your eyes would become acclimated to the dark. It was amazing how well you could hit that target in the dark. So I remember that. I remember that was kind of interesting.
KP.
Didn't do too much of that. I tried not to.
Basic lasted how long?
I don't remember how long it was, to tell you the truth. I don't know. I don't recall.
Now, did they tell you you're going to Vietnam in basic?
No, but we knew it. Everybody knew it.
Okay. So
Even our drill sergeants, not our drill sergeant, but some of the drill sergeants that would do training, particularly hand-to-hand training and things like that, they had come back from Vietnam, and they were training us, teaching us if we had to go to Vietnam, we'd be prepared. So everybody knew. There was no doubt about that.
So what'd you do at Fort Lee?
Well, Fort Lee was just simply a school to learn about handling parts, about ordering parts, about stocking parts, about what parts that you needed to have a regular unit. They call the TO&E, the Table of an Organization and Equipment, which explain what parts you need for a certain size unit. So we learned how to order parts, how to stock parts, which parts to order, which parts to stock, that sort of thing.
And you were there how long?
Wasn't very long. It was only maybe a month, maybe 2 months at the very most.
And then to Atlanta.
Went to Atlanta.
What'd you do there?
Well, we went to Atlanta Army Depot, and there it was a matter of just handling supplies. And Atlanta Army Depot is a very large facility that has all types of equipment, supplies of all kinds. And our job was to learn how to stock and how to find certain things that may be stocked somewhere. An interesting thing about that time in Atlanta, I was there when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And all of a sudden, all the trains and all the buses were full of people coming to Atlanta. It was a very tense time. And that Atlanta Army Depot actually had a big runway there. And there were plans, it never materialized, but there were plans to fly in the 101st Airborne if things got out of hand in Atlanta. We were restricted to post, we couldn't leave. So it was a very intense time. Fortunately, nothing ever happened, at least to that extent, and so it wasn't, as it turned out, it wasn't that bad of a deal, but it was a interesting time.
Okay. And you in Atlanta how long?
I was there, I think about 2 months.
Okay. Then where'd you go?
Well, from there I went to Vietnam. Had orders to report to the Oakland Army, I don't know, I'm not sure what the exact name of it is, Oakland Army Depot, I guess it is. That's where everybody goes to draw your gear and make sure you've got all the shots and make sure you're ready to go to Vietnam.
What were you thinking going to Vietnam?
Well, of course I had learned a little bit about Vietnam by the time I'd gone through basic training and all of that, but I still didn't know a heck of a lot about Vietnam. It was kind of the unknown, you know. Of course, I knew what I was seeing on TV and things like that, but I still didn't know too much about Vietnam.
So you were in Oakland how long?
Oh, it's only a few days.
Okay.
Yeah, just long enough to get your equipment, get your shots, you know, make sure your orders were in order, and then they put you on a bus and drive you to what is the name of that Air Force base? Travis Air Force Base, which is north of San Francisco. And there they put you on a big plane and send you to Vietnam.
What were you thinking on the airplane?
Well, thinking on the airplane, you're still wondering what's it going to be like. You know, what's it really like? Is it, you know, are you going to be under fire constantly? Is it, you know, what is it like? You just don't know. Interesting, when I left Travis Air Force Base, which is north of San Francisco, the wind was out of the south, so we took off to the south. We flew, and by that time it was dark, and we flew right over San Francisco. We turned west and flew right over San Francisco, and I can remember the date because it was the 4th of July, and I could see the fireworks coming up off of San Francisco. And I thought, how ironic. Here they are sending me off to Vietnam with a fireworks show.
That was July 4th of 68?
68. I'll never forget that. I always remember that date because of the fireworks.
Where'd you land in Vietnam?
I landed in at Bien Hoa Air Force Base. That was the longest flight I've ever had in my life, flying from the United States to Vietnam. It's about a 23-hour flight, and since we had taken off just as it turned dark, and we followed the sun, I guess, that whole way, or actually the sun had gone all the way around and was following us by the time we got there. And the sun came up 22 hours later. 22 hours in darkness,
Yes.
flying to Vietnam.
Now, did you have a stop on the way?
We did stop, I think, in Alaska to refuel.
Okay.
Probably to top off and go the rest of the way.
What'd you do in Bien Hoa?
Well, Bien Hoa was interesting because our plane landed. We taxied up to this, what looked like a tin roof hut. And I remember they opened the door, and the first thing that hit you is the smell. I'm sure you remember the smell of Vietnam. It's very distinctive. Kind of a combination of rotting vegetation and JP4 jet fuel and burning waste, human waste. So that's the first thing that hits you, is that smell. The second thing that hits you is the heat and humidity. So then we get off the plane and we go into this hut, basically, and it was just a matter of picking up our luggage, and they checked our orders again, I think, and then they put us on some buses, some school buses, yellow school bus. The other thing different about it was that those buses had chicken wire over the windows. And I thought, that's interesting. I wonder what that's for. Well, it didn't take me long to figure that out, because we drove off of the air base onto the public highway going to Long Binh. Long Binh was the processing center. And it didn't take me long to figure out what that chicken wire was for, because I could see all these people driving right by the sides of the buses in motorcycles and bicycles and all that thing. Figured out real quickly what that chicken wire was for, is to keep hand grenades from coming right through the window into the bus.
What was the name of those buses they had in They had a name for them.
Yeah.
They had people in them, on them, around them.
I can't remember. But anyway, I got there just after the Tet Offensive. And driving through basically the city of Benoit, going to Long Ben, I could see all of these bullet holes and all the damage into the buildings. All these, buildings that had all kinds of damage on it. It was very obvious what it was from. So you could tell real quickly that there had been some serious fighting in that area. Now, we didn't experience anything at all, but it was obviously there had been some.
What'd you do at Long Ben?
Well, Long Ben, like I said, is a processing center. It's a matter of, they put you up in a barracks, and again, they make sure your records or your orders are correct. It's a matter of making sure you've got all your shots again. But it's a processing center so that they assign you to certain units. And you don't know where you're going to go, but you're supposed to check this bulletin board every day, a couple times a day, to see if your name is on there and who you're going to be assigned to. I found my name on there one day, and it said I was going to the 525th MI group. I thought, what? Because MI is military intelligence. Why am I going to a military intelligence group? Well, the guy shows up in a Jeep to pick me up, throw my bag in the back of the Jeep, and we head off down the highway to Saigon. Well, what I was assigned to was the 525th MI Group Aviation Detachment, because they had an aviation detachment that was there to support the military intelligence group. The drive from Long Ben, which I'd been fairly sheltered a bit from what was happening in Vietnam at that point, driving down the highway, and it was a regular highway, down to Saigon. Well, on that drive, you can see the countryside finally. You can see rice paddies, and you can see, the farms around, and buildings, and you can see all these people on the highway with either on motorcycles or in small cars or these pedicabs, which is nothing more than like a Cushman scooter with a kind of a cab over the back of it. Mm-hmm. And I noticed one that was full of meat all cut up, and that was a water buffalo that they had killed and slaughtered, and all this meat was in the back of it, and they were heading down the highway, going to Saigon. So it's kind of interesting. It's kind of my first really view of what Vietnam was like.
So what did you do in the 525th?
That was a very interesting unit. Their job was to collect intelligence information. They had people with all sorts of specialties. They even had professional safe crackers. They had interrogators. They had intelligence agents that actually worked with Vietnamese people out around the country, gathering information for them. And our job was to support those activities with the aircraft that we had. We had 5 Hueys in country. We had 3 fixed-wing aircraft. And our job was to help support those activities. Now, our flying with them was a little bit different, that everything was what we call single ship, solo helicopter, out flying, landing in the jungle somewhere. Never had any gun support, no backup of any kind. Our typical mission, we would have, I remember this captain that we worked a lot with. He would come in, he would schedule a flight. He was supposed to meet us at the airport at a certain time. He would show up, we would take off, and then he would tell us where we were going. we'd get our coordinates where we were to fly to after we took off. Typically, he would arrive with a briefcase. And we'd take off, he'd tell us where to go, and it would almost always be some spot out in the middle of the jungle somewhere. And we would land, he would jump out, he would run off out into the jungle. A few minutes later, he would come back without the briefcase. We'd get in, we'd go home. And after a few times, we figured out what was going on. You know, you hear in the news today about we will never negotiate with terrorists. Well, what was happening, we figured out that every time we'd do one of these missions, and he would go off out in the jungle with a briefcase and then come back without it. A few days later, just miraculously, some POW would come stumbling into an American base. He had escaped somehow. Well, didn't take long to figure out that what they were doing, they were buying back certain POWs that had certain information or had, you know, that we didn't want the enemy to know about. In fact, we asked this guy, later on, we asked him, how much money do you think you've carried this last year? He said, well, I don't know, I don't get to count it. I imagine probably 3 or 4 million. So every time I hear him say we don't negotiate with terrorists, I kind of shake my head and smile, because the real world is that, yes, we did.
Now, were you a crew member on the helicopter?
I flew, well, first of all, I was in charge of all the parts, repair parts for that unit. Now, where I was at in Saigon, we had 1 helicopter and 2 fixed-wing aircraft. The helicopter was brand new. The Huey was brand new, so didn't need too many repair parts. So I found out real quickly that I didn't have very much to do. So I started flying as a crew member, as a door gunner. And that was a whole lot more interesting than sitting around not doing anything. So I started flying as a door gunner. And so that's how I started flying, basically. But yeah, like I said, some of the missions that we went on with those people were very interesting. Later you would think, that was really stupid to do that. Or you think, man, that was dangerous. Why did I ever go and do that?
And what areas would you fly to? Do you recall?
We flew, well, since we were stationed in Saigon, we had also a helicopter station in Nha Trang and some in Da Nang and one down in the, down in, where was that at? Another city, I forget. But anyway, we flew primarily in the area around Saigon. Not always, but at least in the 3 core area.
Okay.
But I can remember one mission where we were supposed to meet this sampan out off the coast at a certain time, at a certain location. We flew out there, we found it. We found this sampan, the right place, the right time. We hovered over that sampan, dropped a rope ladder off, and this military intelligence guy, he starts going down the ladder. And there was 5 young draft-age Vietnamese men stood up and looked him right in the eye. Now you gotta think about that. At that time, there were no draft-age Vietnamese men out running around on their own. So he knew real quickly these were not the good guys. So he got up that ladder so quick, and we got out of there so fast. And I think the only reason we weren't fired on by these guys in this boat was because we had our M60s trained on them. But otherwise, it was a very, very sketchy moment.
When did that happen? Do you recall?
I don't remember exactly. That was one of the many, actually it's one of many times that we had interesting missions that we flew on.
Was that your most vivid mission?
No,
What's your most vivid mission?
can't tell you.
Can't, okay. I won't ask.
That's interesting because there are some things that I can talk about with that when I was with that group, and some things I cannot.
Yes.
Some things I don't dare talk about
Yes.
because everybody in that unit had a very high clearance, security clearance. And there are still some things today, after all these years, that I can't talk about.
What type of quarters did you have in Saigon?
It was interesting. We had some, as compared to a lot of people, we had very nice quarters. We lived in an old shell of a hotel. There was no windows, no doors, nothing like that. It was just walls. It was just a shell of what obviously had been a hotel. And we had room, and there were about 6 of us that lived in each one of these rooms. And later on, we were even able to secure an air conditioner. So we had an air conditioned room in Vietnam. You know, that's unusual. But yeah, we had very nice living quarters. We even had TV. We watched Armed Forces Vietnam television. I even saw the Bob Hope show that was being held in Long Bend, and I saw it on TV.
I was there.
Were you?
I got to see Bob Hope at Long Bend with, what's her name?
Anita Bryant was there, I know.
No,
Of course, he made more than one trip. But yeah.
I saw him in Long Bend in the Christmas of '68 with, the actress. Made the movie with Elvis Presley.
I remember, let me tell you a story about watching that Bob Hope show on TV. We were all sitting there in the room watching this on TV, and everything was real melancholy, and everybody was quiet, and nobody was saying anything. And Anita Bryant, I don't know if you remember Anita Bryant,
Yes.
she came on and sang Silent Night. And you could have heard a pin drop in that room, but all of a sudden, some idiot back out in the alley opened up with a 50 cal machine gun. We all hit the floor. It was an ARVN soldier that had done that, but we don't know what he was shooting at the time. But anyway, and that kind of breaks the silence real quickly. And to this day, I cannot hear Silent Night without remembering that and getting a little bit tense.
Yes. I had the same thing with the song Crimson and Clover over and over. That was on the radio when we had a water attack. So every time I hear that song, Saigon.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about Saigon.
Saigon was an interesting city. At that time, I think it was the 7th largest city in the world. It was a big city.
Mm-hmm.
Saigon primarily was made up of a lot of very poor either storefronts or shacks that people lived in. And on the contrast of that, it was made up of some very nice, expensive mansions. So there's a lot of diversity in Saigon. Lots and lots of people. And a lot of traffic. Driving on the streets in Saigon was extremely interesting because hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of motorcycles, bicycles, and things like that. Saigon was a place where you could probably find anything you could look for. Probably a lot of things you shouldn't find, but even luxury items, you could find a lot of things in Saigon. I bought, because I had another guy in our unit had been a jeweler, and he turned us on to some rubies at a shop in Saigon. There were emeralds and rubies and all kinds of precious metals, or not metals, but gems that were coming out of, I guess, Cambodia and Thailand. But I mean, some huge emeralds that you could find. And he knew what he was looking for because he was a jeweler. And so we started buying some of these jewels, you know, as gifts for family members and things like that. So a good example of what you can find. Now at the same time, you can go down to the meat market in Saigon and find rats hanging in the meat market.
Find what?
Rats. And these rats were not the type that you think of. These were huge rats. I mean, bigger than a cat, bigger than some dogs. These are huge rats hanging in the meat market. So you could find a little bit of everything.
Yes. So how long were you in the 525th?
I was there for a full year. Yep.
Then what'd you do?
Well, came home, was assigned to Fort Ruff.
Why did you think coming home? Your year's up.
What did I think coming home? Well, it's like everybody. You're overjoyed about getting out of there, about coming home. Mm-hmm. You realize how lucky you are as compared to some that didn't make it home.
Were you ever fired on from the helicopter?
Yes.
What happened, if I may ask?
I was fired on driving a Jeep one day. I'd have to go ever so often to another military installation north of Saigon to pick up parts for these aircraft. And I'd have to drive across country. Usually it's just fine. It's no problems at all. It's very safe. Driving down the road, and I'd have to go through a village or two. One day, I'd gone and I'd picked up my parts, and I was coming back to Saigon. And I passed a South Vietnamese Jeep sitting on the side of the road, and this soldier standing there, just standing there by the Jeep. I drove right by him. He didn't say anything. He didn't do anything. Drove up a little farther and drove right in the middle of a firefight between South Vietnamese soldiers and Viet Cong. And I had rounds going over my Jeep, and I hit the brakes and turned around and got out of there so fast. But I don't know why this guy hadn't stopped me. But he let me drive right into the thing. So I was fired on that day. I remember that one very vividly. But as far as being fired on in a helicopter, nothing quite that intense. But I know we were fired on a time or two. Nothing that was life-threatening, because either they were too far away firing at us, or that sort of thing. I do remember one of my most vivid memories is flying in an area where they had some surface-to-air missiles, radar-controlled, Russian-made radar-controlled surface-to-air missiles. And when you fly in those areas, if that radar picks up your aircraft, you'll hear 3 pings. If you hear the third one, you're dead. The idea was if you hear 2, then you do a sharp dive to the right, and it'll lock on where you were, and it will miss you. But the question always was, in flying in those areas, when you hear those, in the back of your mind, do you think, did I not hear that first one? Did I miss that first one? Because like I said, if you hear the third ping, that means they've locked onto you with that radar, and you can't get away from it.
Yeah.
So I remember flying in those areas, and that was a little intense.
Oh, this is around the Saigon area?
north of Saigon,
North of Saigon.
quite a ways north. When
Around
this-
Bluefin?
I don't remember where it was. At that time, it was out kind of in the middle of nowhere.
Okay.
I remember the ground below us looked like Swiss cheese from all the B-52 strikes. But that was in the area where we had to be very careful about those radar controlled SAM units.
So you come home, what do you do?
Well,
What's
I
the
was,
first thing you did when you got home?
first thing I do, I meet my wife at the airport
And where'd you
in
land?
Tulsa.
Or where'd you land?
I landed in Tulsa.
So you flew from,
I flew, when I got home, I got into, I guess that was back in Travis Air Force Base, in California.
Okay.
And went from there, flew to Oklahoma. Mhm.
you get home and what do you do?
Well, I think I had a week or 2 weeks off after getting back. So I enjoyed that time getting caught up with family and friends and all of that.
You still live in Hominy at this time?
No, we lived in, actually lived in Dewey, not Dewey, sorry, Drumright.
Drumright.
My wife is from Drumright,
Okay.
and she had stayed there while I was gone in Vietnam.
Mhm.
So, went back to Drumright. And then I had to report to Fort Rucker, Alabama. Fort Rucker is the aviation center, Army Aviation Center. I was the company supply sergeant for them. Now, I had been flying in Vietnam, got really interested in flying, and I had all my paperwork filled out to apply for flight school. Even had a recommendation from a senior aviator. I had my medical done, had everything ready to turn in. But I was still, at that time, I was a Sergeant E5, company supply sergeant. I had a choice then of turning that application in for flight school, or I could re-enlist and draw a quite sizable bonus. At that time, you could draw the bonus as one cash sum. Can't do that today. They've changed the regulations. So I re-enlisted. I was promoted to Sergeant E6. I drew my re-enlistment bonus in one shot, turned in my application for flight school. When I re-enlisted, I had a 6-year obligation. When I turned that application in for flight school, I had a 3-year obligation. So it cut my obligation time in half. At the same time, it allowed me to go to flight school and get the training to fly.
Tell me about flight school.
Flight school was interesting in that it's almost like basic training again. Not so much physical as it is mental. We were assigned to a barracks, and you have TAC officers. Those are usually warrant officers that have come back from Vietnam, and they're assigned to help people learn to become an officer, how to work as a team. And so they have a lot of routines that are, to a lot of us, we had several people in our class that had been in the Army for a while, and so we weren't just new recruits. So we kind of knew how the system was and how the game was played, but we still had to do it. Things like when we were in the barracks there, if we were walking down the hallway and a TAC officer approached us, we had to brace ourselves up against the wall. We had to greet them, we had to tell them who we were, and we had to ask permission to pass. Okay, you know, kind of a game almost. And if you didn't do it right, you got chewed out, and you got all kinds of problems. We would have inspections of our rooms. We had to keep our rooms a certain way. We had a closet. We had to have all of our uniforms hanging exactly the same way, spaced exactly the same distance apart. We had to have things like in our drawer, we had to have our underwear and our socks and things like that. Our socks had to be rolled. They could not be longer than a certain amount. Underwear, handkerchiefs, things like that had to be rolled and had to be exactly. We had a can of shoe polish. If they opened that lid on the shoe polish and there was shoe polish on the lid, you got demerits. So you never used the shoe polish. You know, you kept it there only for display purposes. Everything in that locker and in the drawers of that locker we never used. We never touched them, because you did, they'd end up getting dirty or whatever. They would check the bottom of your boots, the nail holes in the bottom of the boots, to see if there's any rocks in there. Okay? Of course, those boots had to be polished, and you know, we had to make our beds. They had to be, beyond good. They had to be, perfect. We tucked the sheets underneath. There could not be any of the sheet hanging down past the bed spring. You know, had to be perfectly flat. The room had to be spotless at all times. They would come in and check. They knew where to check too, you know. They would check to see if they could find some dust somewhere, you know. Of course, if they found any of those kind of demerits, then you got a lot of problems. But anyway, it was to teach you to pay close attention to details. We learned how to get around those things, because we would get up a half hour early in order to make the bed and to make sure everything was spotless and put away, so that when the lights came on, we had to get out of the building, everything was ready for inspection. So, you know, you learned how to play those tricks. But anyway, us that were a little older, or at least we had spent more time in the Army already, these TAC officers used to hate us because we figured out the game before everybody else did. So when we would have to do a certain thing, you know, if we had to race against the wall, we had to ask permission to pass and all this stuff, we would over-exaggerate everything. And these TAC officers figured out real quick, we knew what was going on, they knew what was going on, and so they hated to deal with us. So after a while, it got to be a real big game with them. As bad as they could give it to us, we could give it back even worse. But that was when you were in the barracks. Now, most of the time during flight school half the day was spent in class, learning about weather, learning about aerodynamics and, you know, flight principles, all that sort of thing. The other half of the day was spent flying. You started out with an instructor. After a while, when you got efficient enough that you weren't going to crash that helicopter, or at least he didn't think you were going to crash the helicopter, he would let you solo, take it around the flight pattern by yourself. And then once you soloed and proved that you were efficient enough that you could do that, fly by yourself, then from then on, most of the flying was solo.
Were you nervous on your solo?
Well, you're nervous because you want to make sure you do it right.
Yeah.
And flying a helicopter is not an easy thing to learn. Once you learn, it's kind of like riding a bike after that. But learning is difficult. Mm-hmm. One of the hardest things to learn is how to hover the helicopter. In a helicopter, you have to use both hands and both feet and your eyes all the time. one of the hardest things to learn was to hover, because if you just think about turning left, that aircraft turns left. You think about turning right, it turns right. So, as somebody trying to learn how to fly, your instinct is to move that cyclic just a little bit. You know, you don't want to. And if you move it a little bit, that aircraft moves a lot. So it was very difficult to learn how to hover. It was a common tool for a flight instructor to have you hover up near a tree. And he says, okay, it's yours. Don't hit that tree, don't crash the helicopter. So it made you really concentrate on.
Which model Huey did you have in flight school?
We flew the TH-55, Hughes TH-55.
Okay. What did you have in Vietnam? You have a Huey?
Yeah, flew Huey.
What model?
Flew the D model, the H model.
Okay.
I've flown the M model.
Oh, okay.
But most of the time it was typically would be the H model.
Yeah. Okay.
But anyway, flight school was fun. That was the first part of flight school. Once you finished the primary, and that was in Fort Walters, Texas, we went to primary flight school. Once there, you went to Fort Rucker, Alabama, to start flying the Huey. And learning tactics, learning how to fly in and out of tight enclosed spaces, and how to fly in formation. A lot of the things that you'd be doing in Vietnam. So once you mastered the Huey and got all those tactics down, you knew what you were doing. You know, you were well on your way.
What's your most vivid memory of flight school?
Gosh, I don't know. Flight school, you're so busy all the time. It's hard to have a vivid memory of any one particular thing, I think. One of the things I remember in flying in Fort Walters in the primary flight training was that at the same time there were several Vietnamese student pilots there also. We had to watch out for the Vietnamese student pilots, because the communication when they would come back at the end of the day when everybody was coming back into the airfield. You know, you had to call the tower, you had to tell them where you were, and you know, they'd tell you, okay, you're number 2 in line, and so forth. Well, you'd hear the Vietnamese pilots, they'd say, okay, I come, and that's it. And so you really start looking around. That's one of the most vivid things I can remember about particularly primary flight school, was just watching out for the Vietnamese pilots, because they didn't follow the same rules as everybody else.
What was your average day in flight school, if that's a fair question?
Average day, well, again, it'd start out with making sure your room was ready for inspection. You'd be bused to, after eating, you'd be bused to probably a classroom out of one of the airfields. You'd sit there and go through class for the morning. You'd go to lunch, and in the afternoon you'd come back and you'd meet up with your instructor pilot or whoever, and they would give you your assignment, and you'd go out and fly that afternoon.
Flight school lasted how long?
Total, about 9 months.
Okay. Was it just Fort Walters and Fort Rucker?
Oh, together,
Okay.
9 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you got your commission when?
When you finished flight school.
When was that? When did you finish flight school?
Does it say it there? That says 8th day of March, 1971.
1971. So you became, were you commissioned or warrant officer?
Warrant officer.
Warrant officer.
Yep.
Oh yeah, I see the warrant officer. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. After flight school, what'd you do?
Well, I went immediately to Vietnam. Went through the same old routine. Went to Oakland. Went to, you know, the same thing. Flew into. I don't know where I flew into, to tell you the truth, that first time, or that second time. I remember I ended up at.
Is it Cameron Bay?
It may have been Cameron Bay. No, it wasn't Cameron Bay. I know because we ended up. It was either in Saigon or maybe I went back to through Long Binh. I don't remember. But anyway, I went from there to, they flew us to Tuiwa, and I spent a night there. And from Tuiwa, then I flew down to Dong Batin, where I was assigned to the 92nd Assault Helicopter Company.
Dong Batin.
Dong Batin. Dongbathin. And that's right across the bay from Cameron Bay.
Okay.
Signed the 92nd Assault Helicopter Company. They took one look at my records and they said, "Oh, you've got experience with parts." They said, "We're going to make you in charge of the parts for us. And we're going to make you a maintenance officer and you'll be flying test flights." And I'm thinking, oh, that's great. I'm not going to be part of a regular flight platoon where I'm going out and flying every day with everybody else. I'm going to be doing something else by myself here at the 92nd, which I did. As far as the parts thing, that was being handled by the enlisted people. They knew what they were doing. I didn't have to really even mess with that, but I spent almost every day flying test flights, which meant that if a helicopter got shot down or went down for maintenance problems, after it was fixed and repaired, went through maintenance, then I'd take it out and see if it still fly. I had a certain routine I had to go through to check the engine, to check the flight controls, to make sure that it was back to where it should be. And then I would sign off on it, and then it would go out on missions the next day.
You on the helicopter by yourself?
Well, most flights was by myself. Yes, I didn't have a co-pilot on test flights. Mm-hmm. Now, occasionally I would take the crew chief along with me. It's his aircraft. He's the one responsible for it, and so we'd take them out and we'd give them a little stick time. After I did my thing, after I went through all the checks and made sure everything was operating correctly, I'd say, okay, you take it, you fly it for a little while. Okay? So we let the crew chiefs fly it some. You've probably flown a little. Yeah.
I could not cover though.
Yeah, that's but so we let the crew chiefs fly. The idea was that if the pilot, co-pilot, for some reason got shot, incapacitated, whatever, then maybe that crew chief would be able to get that helicopter back home. So we would take the crew chiefs quite frequently out to fly with us. You'll enjoy this. One day, part of that flight check that I did, you had to do an auto rotation. Now, according to what we were supposed to be doing, we were never supposed to do an actual auto rotation all the way to the ground. We'd recover it with power and pull up. And one day I had this crew chief with me, nice kid, a Hispanic kid, very quiet, but he took real good care of that aircraft, and he was flying with me. And I got to the auto rotation bar. And I looked around, there was no other aircraft in sight, nobody was watching, the tower was too far away, and I saw this nice, flat, sandy beach area. So I put this thing in an auto rotation, and here we go, down. And of course he was expecting me to pull the power back on and pull out. I didn't. I took it all the way to the ground. I set it down. His eyes got about as big as saucers. 'Cause he didn't know I was going to do that. That scared him to death. But he probably would have shot me if he had a weapon with him. But
You have a hard landing, did you?
nope, didn't have a hard landing. Set it down nice and smooth.
That was one of the biggest things they had to make sure the skids weren't.
Yep,
Yeah.
did spread apart. No,
Yeah.
and made a good landing, and but he'll probably never forgive me for that. But hopefully it'll give him some confidence if something does happen to that aircraft that he was going to be okay.
Well, that's
Because
his helicopter.
his helicopter.
Yes, it's not yours. It's his.
That's right, it's his.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun for me. And of course, if I'd been spotted doing that, I'd have been in big trouble.
So, what were some of the? Were you the test pilot the whole time you were with the 92nd?
Yes. Now I was with them until about November, I think, November, December, somewhere along there, because the unit was deactivated.
When were you assigned to that unit?
That would have been in April.
April of '71.
April 71.
Okay. Now, was Vietnam winding down at this time?
Yes. It was winding down, which was good and bad at the same time. It was winding down because the idea was to reduce casualties, but the whole program made things even more dangerous to fly. Because before they started really the emphasis of winding down, if something were to happen, you had to put the aircraft on the ground or you got shot down, whatever. If you went down, somebody was there within minutes to pick you up and get you out. Okay. By the time I left there in '72, if you got shot down, if your aircraft went down for mechanical problems, whatever, you could plan on walking out. Nobody was coming to get you. And that got really, really bad toward the end. See, I went from the 92nd, I was assigned to the 57th Assault Helicopter Company in Pleiku. It was while I was there at Pleiku that those kind of problems surfaced with trying to reduce casualties, but yet at the same time making it very, very dangerous. Some of the problems was not just in flying, some of the problems was the rules of engagement were changing. Before, if we were shot at, we could fire back, you could shoot back, you could defend yourself. Late in the war, if you got shot at, you had to first of all see the individual that was shooting at you. Not just where the fire was coming from, but see the individual that was shooting at you. And if he was in a certain area, it may be a no-fire zone. So you may not be able to even fire back. Or if it was an area where you might be able to fire back, you had to see the individual, you had to call about 3 different agencies to get permission to fire back in that area. 2 of those being Vietnamese. And maybe half hour later, if you got permission to fire back, there would be nobody there. So the rules of engagement got to be very, very dangerous. You know, they could shoot at you, but you couldn't shoot at them. And in fact, even after the Lieutenant Calley incident at My Lai, it got to the point where you didn't want to carry a weapon because you didn't want to shoot. If you shot at anybody, you had a lot of explaining to do. So rules of engagement got to be really, really dangerous.
Do you have any really interesting incidents in the 92nd or 57th?
The 92nd, I was standing out by our maintenance facility one day, and we had a flight platoon that took off, and the company XO was flying with them that day. And I could see where they were going to land up on the mountain up here. And as he made his approach, he set the aircraft down on a mine, and it blew the helicopter back. And I saw it. I saw it when it happened, because I was watching them make their approach, and I was a long ways away, but still I could see when that thing went off. So that's one of the things that happened there. There's several things that happened there that, well, just after I got to the 92nd, one night, and it was raining like cats and dogs, and our XO came in looking for somebody to go on a mission with him. It was an emergency kind of mission real quick, and I was the only one around. He grabbed me, and we jumped in the aircraft, and we took off in the rain. What had happened is that a Special Forces unit was out and in contact and in danger of being overrun, and they were right near Cameron Bay, but out on a ledge, out on a rocky ledge. And we flew to that spot, and we had to hover one skid on the rock while these guys jumped on and we took off. That was a little exciting, particularly just being brand new in country. But we got them out of there. But that happened with the 92nd. Now the 57th, that unit was a little different in that their mission every day was to go across the border. We weren't supposed to be there.
In
officially, Cambodia.
Yeah.
We weren't supposed to be there officially. But what happened is that they would put in groups up in the north. They would come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, do their little deed, whatever it was, and then our job was to extract them out of there after they'd come down into Cambodia, a certain area. And that got to be extremely interesting. Sometimes you could land, you could get down to the ground. Sometimes you couldn't because you had 50-foot canopy. So in those cases we'd drop a rope, and those guys, if they could get there and get on that rope, then we'd pull them out. Other times, if you could get to the ground, sometimes it turned into a foot race between the bad guys coming on this side, the good guys coming the other way. It was a matter of seeing who got there first. And again, we weren't even supposed to be in Cambodia at that time. Now today, there's books written about all this, so it's not something that unknown. But some interesting. We had one of our pilots that particular day was a very, very hot area. There'd been an F-4 shot down in the area. There'd been a Jolly Green shot down. Lots of fire. It was really hot. He had gone in, sit down, pick up these guys, and they weren't there. And the thing about his helicopter, he had a big American flag painted on the door, which made a heck of a target. But he went in, sat down, they weren't there, he pulled out, and as he was leaving, the crew chief says, "Here they come." He turned that thing around, got back down in there, got him out of there, and take the fire the whole time. Got him out. Now, any other place, he would have probably been nominated for for all kinds of awards.
Oh, yeah.
But since we weren't supposed to be there anyway, nothing. But that was really dangerous
Yeah.
thing.
That was in Cambodia also.
That was in Cambodia. we, talking about what was happening toward the end of the war there, we had one of our pilots flying a Vietnamese co-pilot, and they got shot down. And they knew they were okay. They could be seen on the ground. They were taking fire, so it was a hot area. One of our most experienced pilots was within minutes of them. He says, okay, I'll go in and get them. Before he got there, the company commander says, no, hold up, you hold on, I'll go in and get them. Before he got there, there was a maintenance officer. No, that's the maintenance officer first. Then it was the company commander. And then before the company commander got there, the battalion commander calls up and says, nope, hold on, I'll go in and get him. Now he was some miles away. And before he got there, nobody got him. Now what they were doing, they were looking for medals.
Yes.
At the end of the war.
Yes.
And it cost somebody their life. So it got to be really dangerous. Well, again, now that you ask me, I can think of something that happened in the 92nd that kind of a sad situation, but at the 92nd, there at Donga 10, they put out night patrols. And one night, this patrol came into contact, or they saw somebody, or they weren't the only ones out there. So they scrambled some gunships, some Cobras, out to give them some support. And the people on the ground, the guys gave them coordinates to fire on. So they rolled in and fired on that coordinate. Put the rocket right in the middle of their unit, because they'd given them the wrong coordinate. Let's see, they killed 9 of U.S. people that night. And of course, when that happened, they scrambled everybody out and they got everybody out of there. But that pilot that had fired that rocket certainly wasn't his fault, because he fired on the coordinates that they gave him. But he killed 9, and he spent the next 3 or 4 days in his hooch. Nobody saw him, So you can imagine that was a sad situation.
Oh yeah.
But it happened. But
Anything else?
I remember an incident when I was with the 92nd. Also, they scrambled one of our helicopters out to go pick up an MP and go pick up this kid who had been in country 2 weeks. He was on guard duty, and they were having a show at the club, and the EM club, the enlisted men's club. And he came in one time, checked his rifle, went in and watched the show a little while, went back out. Came back the second time, didn't check his rifle, and opened up on that group that was in the club. Killed 2 or 3, but he killed one guy who, I think he had 2 weeks left in country. And they scrambled our helicopter and the CMP to go pick us kid up. Obviously they had detained him by that time, but the CMP came back telling us, he said, I never felt so much like killing a person in my life. He said, this kid laughed the whole way. They were taking him over to Cameron Bay. He said he laughed the whole way over there, and he had just killed these people for no reason. He said he was probably high on something, and but those kind of things are sad when that happens. But they happen.
Of course, the news media says all the drugs in Vietnam.
Yeah, there were some drugs in Vietnam, but it's not like what everybody says.
Well, I tell people that said, if we had a guy in drugs, we got rid of him because you don't want a pilot or a crew chief on drugs.
You can't trust them. Yeah.
So we'd get rid of them.
Yeah.
And everyone did that. I taught guys in the we had a guy in drugs we got rid of. You
Sure.
don't want a guy unemployed on drugs.
No, sir.
I think that's a story that's the news media.
Oh, yeah, yeah. There's a lot of stories like that that's been fabricated over the years, and it's
Well,
just
I just interviewed a guy, and he said, well, the news media used to report the news, now they make the news.
yeah.
Okay.
I had a kid that worked for me. He worked in our parts department when I was with the 57th. Nicest kid in the world, hardest working kid you'd ever want. Did a good job, but occasionally he would get on whatever he was taking, and he'd be wasted. He just wouldn't come to work. When that happened, you knew what it was. But what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Send him to Vietnam? I mean, but I mean, best kid in the world. It's really a shame that some of those kids did get hooked on some of that stuff. But I mean, he was one that had he not been on that stuff, he would he did a fantastic job.
Where is this?
That was when I was at Playku.
Okay.
But some days he just wouldn't come to work.
Yeah.
And if he didn't come to work, that's all right. You didn't want him there if he's going to be.
Yes. When we were at On-K, I noticed that's a beautiful part of the country up
Yeah.
the islands up there. Vietnam's a beautiful country.
Oh, it is, yeah.
How would you compare Vietnam as an enlisted man and an officer? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Same country. To me, it was almost two different wars. Because my first time was so different than the second time. Not just because of what I was doing, what my responsibilities were, but things had changed. That first time, everybody had a job to do, and everybody was doing it. He was working hard and seemed to have a purpose. The second time, because they were trying to, start the drawdown, it got where people were not taking or being responsible for their work. They weren't doing the job they could be doing. It was just a little different attitude.
When
That's
would you leave Vietnam the second time?
April of '72.
What did you do after you left Vietnam?
Well, when I left Vietnam, as I was leaving Vietnam, they of course they were trying to reduce the numbers. They gave me an early out. Now here I had drawn a re-enlistment bonus, and I got a shorter term, and then I spent only a part of it. So they gave me an early out. Okay, all right, fine. I figured after flying for 2 years, either as a crew member or as a pilot, I was probably pushing my luck. I thought I probably shouldn't be doing that too much more. So I decided to get out. I went back to school at Oklahoma State. My schooling was much different the second time than it was the first time. So I got out, graduated, got a job offer from Farm Credit System.
What's your degree in?
Agricultural economics. Got a job with the Production Credit Association in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Beautiful place. Spent a year there, and then got an offer to move to Concordia, Kansas as vice president in charge of credit there. Spent 3 years there. When I went to Concordia, their credit quality, they grade every loan as far as how good it is or how they were like, and I don't know what the goal is, but they were like at 73% acceptable loan quality. That's about as bad as you can get. When I left there, they were at 92%. In 3 years. And one of the ways that I had helped improve that was by teaching some of these farmers and ranchers how to use the futures market to help reduce the marketing risk. Well, me doing that got the attention of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. I actually got attention of somebody in Wichita, which is over the group, and they recommended me to. So I got a phone call out of the blue one day from the Chicago Mercantile Exchange asking me to come to Chicago to interview for a job. And I thought, I had never thought about Chicago. I mean, So they flew me to Chicago. I saw Chicago from the airport to downtown. I interviewed with them, went back to the airport, flew home. Thought about it for a while, and I called them back and said, there is no way I'm going to raise my boys in Chicago. Because what I had seen from the airport to downtown and back was not the most attractive place to raise a family. Well, my boss, soon-to-be boss, he was pretty smart. He waited for a couple of weeks. He called me back. He said, why don't you and your wife fly up, let us put you up, let us show you it's not quite as bad as you think it is. Okay, so we did. We didn't have anything to lose, so we flew up to Chicago, put us in a nice hotel, and he took us to the suburbs. He lived in the suburbs, but he took us to the suburbs, away from downtown, and showed us around, and sure enough, it wasn't what you perceive it to be, And so I finally agreed, okay, well, I'll go move to Chicago. Well, the best thing I ever did, because it just doubled my income overnight. We lived in the suburbs, northwest suburbs, Chicago. Turned out to be kind of like any other town. My kids went to a smaller school in Chicago than they would have gone to in Kansas, than they were going to in Kansas. In fact, it took them about 6 months just to catch up academically for what they were, the difference between Kansas and Chicago. And they had some opportunities, the kids had some opportunities there that they would never have had we stayed in Kansas, obviously. But for me personally, the first week I worked for the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, I saw both the East Coast and the West Coast in the same week. And my job was to help, was to work with agricultural bankers to help them understand how it was to their advantage to allow their borrowers to use the futures markets to reduce their marketing risk. So I'd hold seminars around the country, all over the place. In fact, I did one at Pawhuska. When I was working for the, I went back to Pawhuska, when I knew everybody was there. I grew up with all these people. But anyway, and the advantage to me with that was that I made some fantastic contacts, people all over the country. I saw 43 different states and about 4 different Canadian provinces during that time. I was there about 7.5 years. When we moved up there, I figured, well, we'll give it about 3 years and see how it goes. So, there's 7.5 years with them.
When did you come to Bartlesville?
Well, I moved to Bartlesville last October.
Oh, okay.
A year ago, October.
Why'd you come here?
Well, when we left Chicago, we moved back to Colorado. Okay. And to tell you the truth, I had had this strong urge to get back to Colorado when I was in Chicago. And I thought, well, okay. So we moved to Chicago, and we moved to Colorado. We lived in Colorado. Our daughter, who was 10 at the time, collapsed at home one night. Rushed her to the emergency room. They checked her over, didn't know exactly what was wrong. They said, it's serious. You got to get her to another place that's got more equipment and more doctors to. So they took her to another hospital there in Denver, did an x-ray, and it was fortunate because probably the best brain surgeon in the country was on call that night. But they did an x-ray, found a big brain tumor. And had to have an immediate surgery. Went through that. She came out of that, did pretty well, but what happened when she collapsed, it had a small blood vessel that had burst, that was feeding that tumor. It's kind of like having a stroke, you know. So she couldn't use, I think it was left side, I think it was. Couldn't use one side of her body, at least not well. Had trouble talking. But she slowly got better from that. Went through radiation treatment, never got sick. Never once got sick with radiation. And I was, with chemotherapy, I should say. It was chemotherapy she didn't get sick from. And then she had to have a series of radiation treatments, and I was taking her twice a day for radiation. But she started getting sick again. Started getting sick from when she's going through radiation. And the oncologist says, something's not right. She shouldn't be getting sick from radiation, from that radiation treatment. So they went in and did a spinal tap and found cancer cells in the spinal fluid. And at that point, they knew there was nothing they could do. She'd had 2 surgeries already, brain surgeries, to remove what they could, but she lived 6 months and died. Now, I tell you all that because all that urge that I was feeling to move to Colorado wasn't because of me. It was because of her. Because had we not gone back to Colorado, she wouldn't have been surrounded by the people that she was surrounded by when she was sick. Had we stayed in Chicago, no, she would not have that kind of treatment or support or anything else. So, but anyway, that's how we got back to Colorado. And then, let's see, I worked for Dean Witter for a while as a commodities broker, a stockbroker. Then I worked for Charles Schwab and Company. And then back when the dot-coms bust happened, I got laid off. About half of the people in that firm got laid off. Here I am. I was in my 50s at that time. I thought, what the heck do I do now? It's kind of hard to find a job at that age, and and nobody in that industry hiring anybody. So I had heard about and I found out about Sears they had a type of store, a Sears Hometown Store, which is not a franchise, but at the same time, I mean, you own the store, but yet they provide all the merchandise. And basically you earn a commission off what's sold through the store. So they were needing somebody to open a store in Trinidad, Colorado. And so I went down there and invested a bunch of money and opened that store. Now, here, March 5th of 2013, my wife, who she has MS anyway, but not a real bad case of MS, but she has MS. But she was outside, and where we lived in Colorado, we had 80 acres in the mountains, beautiful area, but it's rough, She was outside. We think she just lost her balance and fell, probably because of the MS. And when she fell, she crushed her vertebrae, broke her back. And so we knew when that happened that we weren't going to be able to live there any longer. It was just too darn rough. She couldn't walk, she couldn't, do anything. So that's why we decided to move back here. Yeah. We hadn't been back here in a long time, but yet it's still home because we've both grown up in Oklahoma, and, we knew. And so that's why I'm back here in Bartlesville.
You came to Bartlesville then?
Mm-hmm. Came to Bartlesville. I wasn't going to move back to Pawhuska.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, we didn't want to move to Drumright, that's where she's from. And we thought Bartlesville, well, we'd be close to medical, whether here or in Tulsa. You know, we've got, it's not a big town, but yet it's not a real small town either, and so it's got, you know, restaurants and shopping and things like that, and so we figured, yeah, this might be the best area for us.
In 1975, whenever Vietnam was, you know, they were taking over, and you saw all the helicopters flying out, being pushed off the ships and everything.
Mm-hmm.
What was your reaction?
So it made me sick, see those helicopters being dumped in the ocean.
That's the same thing with me.
It's like, couldn't believe that. That was just unbelievable.
Why were we in Vietnam?
I don't know, maybe you can tell me. I mean, as it started out, I think they had good intentions of helping to support the South Vietnamese, but it mushroomed out of control and something much larger than what they ever, I think, really intended or thought it would, and we kind of got ourselves caught up into that, and no way to, well, I shouldn't say no way, weren't no obvious way to get out of it.
Well, the war is good business.
That's some of the things I can't talk about.
Yeah. Would you join the Army again?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I mean, the Army is probably not for everybody, but it was good. It was good for me. I mean, I had a positive experience from it. I mean, I did well. I think I counted up one day. I was promoted to Sergeant E6 in 19 months. That doesn't happen. It doesn't happen today. And I went from there to a warrant officer. I mean, the Army was very good to me.
I'd like to do a word association.
So,
Give you some words, you give
okay.
me a reaction. The first one is basic training.
Challenging.
525th MI Company. Group, MI Group.
Different.
Flight school.
Well, I don't know if I have one word or not. It's challenging but rewarding.
92nd Assault Helicopter Company.
Mm-hmm. Educational.
Huey.
Fun.
Vietnam.
Another life. That's not one word. That's
Lyndon Johnson.
oh. Opportunist.
Richard Nixon.
I don't know. I don't have a word for Richard Nixon. Probably misunderstood. Maybe that's a good word. I don't know.
How do you want to be remembered?
Oh gosh, I don't know. About honorable.
Anything else you want to talk about?
No, probably not. Like I said, there's some things I could that I don't hear. I'll tell you one thing that, I don't know if you want to put it in this thing, but, you know, I told you we weren't supposed to be in Vietnam, or in Cambodia.
Yeah.
When I was with the 525th MI group, we did something that, and this is probably something I should talk about, although it's not that big of a deal anymore. But one day we got this instructions to make up a fake set of numbers, same size as helicopters had going. You know, we made them out of white sticky stuff. You know, and we got this mission one day, and they said, "Okay, bring the numbers with you." And we took off. We headed toward Cambodia. Before we got to the border, we sat down and we put those numbers on, those fake numbers on. At that point, we knew probably what they were for, just in case we were photographed or whatever. We picked up and we went over across the border. We sat down. Out walks this guy in what looked like work clothes. They were green, clean, like new. He came out, got on the helicopter, we took off, went back to Saigon. This guy sat in meetings all day long. Late that afternoon, we did the reverse. We went back, dropped him off in Cambodia, and came home. Well, we figured out pretty quickly who it was. It was Prince Sihanouk. You know, he was the ruling guy in Cambodia at that time. Now, you think about that. Here we went into another country, picked up their ruler, brought him out. You know, that'd be like somebody flying in this country, picking up the president, and taking him out. You know, and didn't really understand what that was all about until years later. And years later, then we learned about they had agreements to put in radar installations in Cambodia, you know, that helped direct B-52s and all kinds of other activity. We also figured out that the job that the 57th Assault Helicopter Company going across into Cambodia and picking up these guys, bringing them out on a daily basis, all of that was part of a big agreement that they signed with Prince Sihanouk. And that, back in that meeting, way back there when,
Yeah.
you know, it all comes full circle, seems like.
What do you think of Pol Pot?
Oh, he was probably an idiot, I don't know.
Whatever happened to him?
No, I think he was, I don't know. I don't know if he died or if he was assassinated or killed.
How many people did he murder in his?
Oh, who knows? Well, see, Prince Sihanouk, he came back into power after Pol Pot began. You know, he was, but yeah, that was a mess.
Well, sir, this is an excellent interview.
Well, thank you.
I want to thank you for your service and thank you for the interview. And again, this is March 18th, 2015. My name is Joe Todd. This has been an interview with John Gaines in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. Thank you.